I'm Maggie O'Halloran. I'm here in Central Florida, coming to talk to you about rosemary. I am one of the educators here at the Florida School of Holistic Living, and we are currently in my garden. So thank you for joining me here in the garden to talk about this gorgeous plant that smells amazing, and you've all known about. It's one of our famous culinary herbs, used in breads and pizza doughs for a long time. Many of you have probably seen it in pictures or historical renditions of the Romans or the Greeks, the dudes that were wearing the togas, basically. And they had these green foliage on their head, and it looks like they're kind of standing around talking about really important stuff. That was rosemary. So rosemary has this long history of being used as a cerebral stimulant. It helps you to remember things. Rosemary, botanical name, it has until a couple of years ago was Rosmarinus officinalis because of that long history of its use in the Roman or Greek apothecaries. A couple of years ago, it was decided that it should be still in the Lamiaceae family, but the botanical name changed to Salvia romarinus, which means that it just was found to be botanically related closer to those salvias. Rosemary smells really good. Like many of our culinary herbs, it is really great as an antiseptic. It can be helpful for digestion. And like many of our culinary herbs, this antiseptic quality is not just good for whenever you're preparing food and making sure those pathogens aren't making their way into your mouth, but it can also be used for topical applications. So it is used for skincare, for its warming and drying qualities. It's used in hair rinses. If you're really into the idea of using rosemary as a beauty product, check out the Florida School of Holistic Living coming up. Our very own Emily Ruff is going to be teaching a backyard beauty class where she'll really be highlighting rosemary's ability to support beautiful hair and skin, so check it out. I personally use it topically as also a bug repellent. It's pretty decent as a bug repellent. Any of your plants that are really strong in the smell department typically make really good bug repellents. And that bug repellent quality is beneficial both in the garden and topically on your skin. So topically, I make something called a liniment. And a liniment, the term liniment, was historically used, you see it written in herb books often, either for things that are used topically for antiseptic qualities or topically for muscle pain relief. So when I'm using the term liniment today, it's more for those antiseptic qualities. And the thing about bug repellent is that many of the things that you find in bug repellent are also pathogen fighting. So for bug repellent, I fill half the jar with either dried or fresh rosemary, and then I add some other plants that are really well known for their bug repellent qualities here in Central Florida, like camphor leaves, or our beautyberry bush has these beautiful leaves that can be crumpled up and put into my bug repellent, which is what I've done here. This is already strained. So I put it into the jar, dried or fresh. I fill the jar with witch hazel, which is for external use only. And this witch hazel comes from mountain rose herbs. You just want to make sure that your witch hazel quality is something that you feel really good about and you feel comfortable putting on your skin. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments and I will answer as quickly as I possibly can. So, in the jar, fresh or dried rosemary and other bug repellent herbs that you enjoy. And then I fill the jar with witch hazel. I cover the jar, I make sure to label it. I keep it in a place that's out of direct sunlight, but that I'll see it so I can shake it every day. And after about 4 to 6 weeks, I would take the jar, I would strain out the plant material, and then I have this wonderful bug repellent ready to go, still labeled. I can add it to any spray bottle. And this looks like a new fancy spray bottle, but you can use almost any spray bottle that you have on hand as long as it is clean. So I have it in my spray bottle. It becomes really portable. I can use it to keep those bugs away, like this morning, the mosquitoes, and it does a decent job, and it smells really good too. So I often keep this in my car and then spray it into the air if I need a little bit of that scent of rosemary to help me feel a little bit more alert in the car. And our rosemary, we're gonna go down to this book, Rosemary Gladstar is one of my herbal teachers. She has written this book, Herbal Recipes for Vibrant Health, which is the course textbook for our Roots of Herbalism course. And in this book, she talks about the idea of nervine and lists rosemary in the nervine stimulant section. So nervine means that it has an impact on the nervous system, and it's listed as a nervine stimulant because when I breathe in or drink a cup of tea that includes rosemary, I get a sense of awareness and settled and focus and clarity that is sort of like caffeine, but nowhere near as stimulating or upsetting to my stomach. So it's this nervine stimulant quality that I add it to tea in the afternoon occasionally just to get a little bit of an uplift. But sometimes I don't have access to make a rosemary tea or the time, space, energy to make it. So I use it as part of a tincture that I call Forget Me Not. And so in this tincture, I have other plants that you've probably heard of: ashwagandha, gotu-kola, tulsi, which is another wonderful plant that I utilize, especially in times of stress. And you can find I did another video on tulsi or holy basil that has lots of wonderful benefits that it's really easy to grow here in Central Florida and a lot of other warm climates. But I've included rosemary there. And so I made a standard tincture and incorporated that rosemary to access those nervine stimulant qualities. So, growing. Rosemary is incredibly easy to grow. In Northern California, walking through neighborhoods, people had it as 5-foot tall hedges because it just grows so easily, especially in Florida sandy soil. So we have, whenever I say Florida sandy soil, I'm not saying that you can plant it at the beach. I'm saying the Florida sandy soil allows a lot of space for drainage because we have so much sand in our soil. So it likes that really well drained soil. It likes to have moisture, but it can also tolerate drought. This particular plant was a rescue. Sometimes I find myself bringing home plants that I know will come back to life, but someone else has decided it's no longer beneficial to them. So this was, I am imagining, someone's rosemary Christmas tree purchase, probably from Costco. And often whenever you purchase a plant in a pot at a place like Costco that is in the shape of a Christmas tree, it's not really designed to bring it home and put it in your garden and let it grow, or bring it home and leave it in that little pot for a long period of time. So if you bring it home and leave it in that little pot, it's not going to be very happy. It would likely be either overwatered or underwatered because it doesn't show signs of being too dried out until much later in the process. And a lot of people accustomed to chopping down a Christmas tree would just see the leaves turning brown as like a normal part of a Christmas tree. But rosemary is really communicative about her needs. And I realized that rosemary does not actually have a female or male identity. So it's a plant. Rosemary, if it starts to turn brown, the leaves start to turn brown, that means it's not getting enough water. If the leaves are starting to turn black, that means it's getting too much water. So it's really communicative, pretty easy to tell. It's not super prone to bugs or pests or a lot of other pests that you have in the garden, molds and fungus that we get a lot in Central Florida. So pretty easy to take care of as long as it has that nice, well-drained soil. It takes, whenever I got it, I just cut it back, way back. You can see some of the places that it still haven't grown in. I could definitely cut those back some more. But then I have all this wonderful, nice green growth. In a pot in Florida through our dry season, I do water it. But I have big goals to have a rosemary hedge in my front yard here in Central Florida, and I'm well on my way. And I typically don't water if the rosemary plant is in the ground, because we get enough like humidity in the air and afternoon occasional rain that if it's in the ground, it should be okay. If you notice that it's starting to turn a little bit brown or the leaves are getting droopy, you can water it in the ground, but typically it doesn't need it. If you are keeping it in a pot, it definitely wants a little bit of water every week, maybe every other week, depending on how humid it is. Because it is a plant that prefers dry, it is similar to the lavender plant in that way. It really doesn't want to sit in water. So I find the best way to propagate it is not just taking a cutter and putting it into the soil, because in the soil that's a little bit, I don't find it to be as effective. I take a cutting by looking at the stem. Can you come in closer? By looking at the stem. So on a rosemary plant, you have part of the stem that's brown and looks more like bark. And then you have newer growth that is lighter green, more pliable. This lighter green is what you want to use if you're taking a cutting to make a new rosemary plant. So if I want to take a cutting, and remember, plants want to be used, especially culinary plants. The more you cut it and work with it, the more it's going to grow. So this little guy, so I am going in just above, you want to come closer, just above where the leaves are coming out, and I'm going to snip it. And that will likely grow more. You can see I've done this on the one next to it. I don't know if you can see the brown stem where I've trimmed it, and then it's got all this new growth and new all around because it's filling in that spot. So I've taken this cutting and I will remove all the leaves that will be below the water line. And lucky for me, because now I have fresh rosemary that I'll be able to either just hold in my hand and smell all day because it smells amazing, or I can throw it into some tea. Sometimes I can pinch off these leaves with my fingernails. But you just want to make sure that you're getting a really clean cut. Plants are a lot like people in that if a surgeon was going to be slicing into me to do something to help me, I'd want them to use a really sharp knife and make as small of an incision as possible. And that's how what I think about whenever I'm working with the plant. Okay, so now this plant has all these nodes, and at the nodes is where the plant will want to grow. So by removing the leaves, the plant will still want to grow in those locations. So those will be below my water line, and I can fill this up and then wait a couple of weeks, and I should start to see little roots coming off of those little node areas. I may take off a few more leaves. You want to leave on enough leaves that the plant can still live, because they rely on those leaves to take in the sunlight that they use to make energy so that they can grow. But you don't want too many leaves that it's having to sustain instead of growing new roots. So there's always this balance. Rosemary, I find this propagation method is about 80%. So 8 out of 10 times I take the cutting, I put it in the water, I get new roots. 20% of the time, nothing really happens. So after a couple of weeks, this will probably still be green, but if I don't start to see growth, I'll go ahead and take this out of the water, use it for tea, and try again. Growing rosemary is really simple. Once it has those roots, I would just make a spot in the soil and add it and water it in. So anytime you put new plants in the ground, you'll want to make sure that they have their needs met while they're getting established. Once it's established, you won't need to water rosemary as often. Thank you for joining me in the garden today. Make sure that you comment with any questions that you may have, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And we'll see you next time.